The stars looked different from this far out. Daniel Hayes stood at the viewing window of the human ship Horizon's edge, watching the massive alien station grow larger as they approached. He had been a diplomat for 20 years, but nothing in his career had prepared him for this moment. Earth was about to meet the Galactic Council, and he would be humanity's voice. The station was enormous, bigger than any city on Earth. It orbited a neutron star called Kepler 442, and the structure gleamed with lights from 1,000 different sources. Ships of strange shapes came and went like insects around a hive. Some looked like crystals, others like living organisms. Daniel counted at least 30 different designs, each one representing a species he had never seen before. Kate Morrison came to stand beside him. She was his security officer, a former Marine with sharp eyes and quick reflexes. Her hand never strayed far from her weapon, even though they were supposedly arriving as friends. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, "and terrifying." "That's diplomacy," Daniel replied with a slight smile. "Always a little of both." Behind them, Dr. Peter Lynch was reviewing alien biological data for the 100th time. The scientist looked nervous, constantly adjusting his glasses and muttering about atmospheric compositions and protein structures. Commander Alex Warren, their ship captain, was on the bridge coordinating their final approach with the station's traffic control. The alien voices coming through the speakers sounded like music mixed with machinery. They docked without incident. The airlock opened with a hiss, and Daniel got his first breath of alien air. It smelled strange, like copper and flowers mixed together. The station's interior was vast, with ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into darkness. The walls were made of some material that shifted colors, flowing from blue to green to purple. A delegation waited for them. Daniel recognized them from the briefing materials Earth had received. There was Zixthar, the High Chancellor of the Vrex species. He looked like a massive insect with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected light like mirrors. Beside him stood a Lumini representative, a being made of what appeared to be living crystal that hummed with internal light. The third greeter was a Krell, an amphibious creature with smooth blue skin and 3 fingers on each hand. "Welcome, humans," Zixthar said. His voice came from a translator device that turned his clicks and buzzes into English. "We have waited long to meet you. Your species has been observed for some time." Daniel bowed slightly, a gesture of respect. "Thank you for receiving us. Earth is honored to stand before the Galactic Council." The formalities continued. They were escorted through the station, past areas where hundreds of different species conducted business. Daniel saw creatures that walked on 6 legs, beings that floated without visible means of support, and one species that appeared to be made entirely of living liquid. The diversity was overwhelming. Over the next week, Daniel attended meetings with various council representatives. He learned that the council governed 17 species across thousands of worlds. They maintained peace, regulated trade, and settled disputes. They seemed wise and ancient, their civilizations millions of years old compared to humanity's brief existence. But Daniel noticed something wrong. In quiet moments between meetings, he observed the council members carefully. They were tired. Their movements carried the weight of exhaustion. When they thought no one was watching, their expressions revealed deep sadness. During one session, he caught 2 representatives from different species glaring at each other with barely contained hatred. Peter Lynch noticed it too. "Something's off," the scientist told Daniel one evening in their quarters. "I've been analyzing their biological readings. Stress hormones, elevated heart rates, signs of chronic fatigue. These aren't peaceful diplomats. These are soldiers who've been fighting for too long." Daniel began asking careful questions. The council representatives deflected at first, but slowly the truth emerged. The council was at war. Not a small conflict, but a massive, galaxy-spanning war that had raged for over 1,000,000 years. The enemy was called the Sovereignty, a group of 4 species that had broken away from the council long ago. The reasons for the split were complex, lost in ancient history, but the fighting had never stopped. The war had killed trillions. Entire star systems had been destroyed. Planets were rendered lifeless. The conflict had become so normal, so deeply embedded in galactic civilization, that most beings couldn't imagine life without it. Peace talks had been attempted countless times over the millennia, but they always failed. Pride, revenge, and old wounds kept the killing going. Daniel realized why the council had seemed so interested in humanity. They didn't want friends. They wanted another ally in their endless war. The sovereignty would see humanity as potential enemies. Earth was being positioned as a pawn in a conflict it didn't understand. During a formal reception on the 10th day of his visit, Daniel made a decision. The hall was filled with council representatives, all dressed in their species equivalent of formal wear. The Vrex wore intricate metallic bands around their limbs. The luminae dimmed their internal light to a soft glow. Food and drinks from 100 worlds were displayed on tables that seemed to float in the air. Daniel asked for permission to speak. The room fell silent. All eyes, stalks, sensors, and whatever else served as visual organs turned toward him. I have learned something during my time here, Daniel began. His voice was calm and steady. I have learned that this council is not at peace. I have learned about the sovereignty, about a war that has lasted longer than my species has existed. I have seen the cost of this conflict in your faces, in your weariness, in your unspoken grief. Zixthar's compound eyes reflected alarm. Other representatives shifted uncomfortably. Earth is new to the galaxy, Daniel continued. We have no history with either side of this conflict. We have no ancient grudges, no territorial claims, no desire for revenge. What we do have is experience with war. We have fought each other, destroyed our own world, and learned the hard way that peace is always better than victory. He paused, looking around the room. Let humanity serve as a mediator. Let us help you find a path to peace with the sovereignty, not because we are strong or wise, but because we are neutral, because we have nothing to gain from your war continuing. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Zixthar rose to his full height, his metallic bands clattering. You understand nothing, human. The sovereignty cannot be trusted. They have committed atrocities beyond your comprehension. There can be no peace with them. There can only be victory or extinction. Other voices joined in, some supporting Zixthar, others defending the idea of peace. The reception dissolved into heated arguments. Daniel stood quietly, letting the chaos swirl around him. He had planted a seed, and he knew it would grow, whether the council wanted it to or not. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He recorded a message to Earth, explaining what he had learned and what he had proposed. He outlined a framework for peace talks, identifying the key issues that would need to be addressed. He spoke about territorial disputes, war crimes, and the need for a neutral third party. He ended the message with a quote from an ancient Earth philosopher. The war will end when one side has the courage to stop fighting. Kate Morrison found him in the morning. Her face was pale, her professional composure cracked. Daniel, she said, her voice shaking. You need to come with me, now. He followed her to the medical bay. Dr. Peter Lynch was there, along with Commander Alex Warren. They looked stricken. On the examination table lay Daniel's diplomatic assistant, a young man named Kevin Price, who had been helping with translations and cultural research. He was dead, poison, Peter said quietly. Some kind of neurotoxin. It was in his food at the reception last night. Daniel felt cold. Who was the target? Kate met his eyes. The dishes were labeled in Galactic Standard. Kevin couldn't read it. He took your plate by mistake. The truth hit Daniel like a physical blow. Someone on the council had tried to kill him. His proposal for peace had made him a threat, and they had responded with assassination. Daniel spent the rest of that day in meetings, pretending nothing was wrong. He smiled, shook hands, and discussed meaningless diplomatic protocols. But his mind was racing. He couldn't trust anyone on the council. He couldn't even be sure which species or faction had ordered the hit. The conspiracy could involve one member or dozens. That evening, Daniel recorded another message to Earth. This one was private, encrypted, meant only for the president. He explained what had happened and what it meant. Someone on the council was so invested in the war continuing that they would kill to prevent peace. That meant the war was profitable for someone. Weapons manufacturers, perhaps, or species that controlled resources in contested territories. He ended the message with a request. If something happens to me, don't let it be for nothing. Finish what I started. Find a way to end this war. Humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy shouldn't be as soldiers in someone else's conflict. It should be as peacemakers. Daniel went to bed that night knowing he might not wake up, but he felt strangely calm. He had done what he came to do. He had spoken truth to power. Whatever happened next was out of his hands. In the morning, Kate Morrison found him in his quarters. Daniel Hayes was... The message took 3 weeks to reach Earth. Communications across such vast distances were limited by the speed of light, and even with quantum relay stations, there was no way to avoid the delay. For 21 days, the people on the horizon's edge lived with the knowledge that their world didn't yet know what had happened. For 21 days, Kate Morrison walked through the council station like a ghost, following protocols and attending meetings while planning her investigation. When the news finally reached Earth, the reaction was immediate and explosive. President Helen Foster stood before the United Nations General Assembly, her face projected on screens across every human settlement from Earth to the Mars colonies to the mining stations in the asteroid belt. Her voice was controlled, but everyone could hear the fury beneath it. Ambassador Daniel Hayes went to the stars as a representative of all humanity, she said. He went in peace with open hands and an open heart. He was murdered. Not in combat, not in an accident, but deliberately poisoned by members of the Galactic Council we were meant to trust. The assembly erupted. Delegates shouted questions, demands, accusations. Some called for war. Others urged caution. A few suggested withdrawing from galactic affairs entirely, pulling humanity back to its own solar system and building defenses. President Foster raised her hand for silence. We will not rush to judgment. We will not become what we hate. But we will have answers. We will have justice, and we will not be silenced. Back on the council station, Kate Morrison was already working. She had been a military intelligence officer before joining the diplomatic corps, and those skills were serving her well now. She knew how to observe without being noticed, how to ask questions that seemed innocent, and how to piece together a puzzle from scattered fragments. Commander Alex Warren became her partner in the investigation. The ship captain had his own reasons to want answers. Daniel had been his friend, someone who had convinced him that humanity's future lay in cooperation rather than isolation. Alex had believed in that vision, and now it seemed that vision had gotten Daniel killed. Dr. Peter Lynch provided the technical expertise. He analyzed the toxin that had killed Daniel, breaking down its molecular structure and tracing its origin. What he found was disturbing. The poison was sophisticated, designed to mimic natural biological responses. It wasn't something anyone could make in a basic lab. It required access to advanced medical databases, specifically the kind maintained by the Council's Health and Safety Division. Whoever did this had clearance. Peter explained to Kate and Alex during a secret meeting in the horizon's edge. They knew exactly which compounds would affect human biology without leaving obvious traces. They studied us probably for weeks or months, learning our weaknesses. Kate felt sick. So this was planned long before Daniel proposed peace talks. Or they had contingency plans ready, Alex said grimly. Maybe they poison anyone who becomes inconvenient. The three humans began working in shifts. Kate would attend diplomatic functions, watching and listening. Alex monitored communications traffic, looking for suspicious patterns. Peter analyzed medical records and supply manifests, tracking who had access to the compounds used in the poison. Slowly, a picture emerged. There was a group within the council, a secret faction that operated behind the scenes. They weren't representatives of any single species. Instead, they were individuals from multiple species who shared a common interest in keeping the war going. Some were weapons manufacturers who supplied both the council and the sovereignty. Others controlled shipping lanes that were only profitable because of military traffic. A few were simply ideologues who believed their species could only maintain power through eternal conflict. Kate found evidence in stolen communications. She broke into restricted databases, using codes that Peter had cracked from poorly secured terminals. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The conspiracy went deep. High Chancellor Zixthar was involved, along with at least 6 other high-ranking council members. They had been monitoring Daniel from the moment he arrived, analyzing his speeches, predicting his actions. When Daniel proposed mediation, they had held an emergency meeting. Kate found the recording, hidden in an encrypted file. The conspirators debated options. Some argued for discrediting Daniel, making him appear foolish or naive. Others suggested using political pressure to have him recalled to Earth. But Zixthar had been adamant. The human is too eloquent. His words carry weight. If we allow this peace talk fantasy to spread, others will believe it's possible. The younger generations of our species already question the war. We cannot afford doubt. Another voice belonging to a Krill representative had agreed. Remove the human. Make it look natural. Humans are fragile, new to space. No one will question an accidental death. They had voted. 13 members of the conspiracy had approved Daniel's assassination. Only 3 had abstained. None had voted against it. Kate felt her hands shaking as she copied the files. This was proof, undeniable evidence of murder ordered at the highest levels of council authority. But it was also incredibly dangerous. If the conspirators discovered what she knew, they would kill her and everyone on the horizon's edge. She met with Alex and Peter in the most secure location they could find, a maintenance tunnel deep in the station's infrastructure. The air was thick and hot, filled with the hum of machinery. Kate showed them the recordings. Alex's face went hard. "We need to leave now, get this evidence to Earth." "They'll stop us," Peter said. "The moment we file a departure request, someone will question it. They'll delay us, search the ship, find the files." "Then we don't ask permission," Alex replied. They spent 2 days preparing. Alex worked with his engineering crew, running diagnostics on the horizon's edge and making sure every system was at peak performance. Kate quietly warned the human personnel on the station to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. Peter encrypted the evidence multiple times, hiding copies in different storage systems throughout the ship. On the morning of the 3rd day, Alex filed a routine departure request, claiming they needed to return to Earth for resupply. The request was approved without issue. The horizon's edge undocked smoothly, following the standard departure route through the station's traffic control zones. They were almost clear when the alerts went off. Kate was on the bridge when the communications board lit up with urgent messages. Council security was ordering them to stop and submit to inspection. Ships were being launched to intercept them. "They know," Kate said. Alex was already accelerating, pushing the horizon's edge beyond its normal operational speed. "Hold on to something." The ship shuddered as it broke free from the station's gravitational influence. Behind them, 3 council security vessels gave chase. They were faster than the human ship, sleeker and more advanced. Weapons powered up, targeting systems locking on. Alex flew like he was possessed. He had trained as a fighter pilot before becoming a captain, and those instincts saved them. He juked and weaved through the debris field surrounding the neutron star, using chunks of dead planets and asteroids as cover. The council ships were faster, but they weren't expecting such aggressive flying from a diplomatic vessel. One of the council ships fired. The energy blast missed the horizon's edge by meters, close enough that the ship's hull groaned from the heat. Alarm screamed. Peter was thrown against a bulkhead, cutting his forehead. Kate strapped herself into the weapon station. Even though she knew their defensive systems were no match for council technology, Alex made a desperate maneuver, diving toward the neutron star itself. The gravity well was immense, warping space and time. It was incredibly dangerous, but Alex knew the human ship was smaller and more maneuverable than the council vessels. He skimmed the edge of the star's influence, feeling the ship groan under the stress. The council ships tried to follow, but they were too large, too committed to their pursuit vector. 2 of them pulled away, unable to risk the gravity well. The 3rd ship continued, its captain either brave or foolish. For several terrible seconds, both ships hung on the edge of destruction. The neutron star's radiation battered their shields. Metal heated to dangerous temperatures. Then Alex caught a gravity slingshot, using the star's pull to fling the horizon's edge away at incredible speed. The council ship wasn't as fortunate. It got caught in the gravity well and couldn't break free. Kate watched on the sensors as the ship was pulled apart, its structure failing under the immense forces. She felt no satisfaction, only sadness. More deaths added to an already endless count. The horizon's edge jumped to faster-than-light travel as soon as they were clear. The transition was rough, rattling everyone on board. But they were away, racing back toward Earth with evidence that would change everything. President Foster received them personally when they arrived 3 weeks later. The horizon's edge docked at the orbital platform above Earth, and Marines secured the area. Kate, Alex, and Peter were escorted to an emergency session of the Security Council, where they presented their evidence. The recordings played in the chamber, Zixthar's voice echoing through speakers. "Remove the human. Make it look natural." The council representatives from different nations listened in stunned silence. When the recordings ended, the room erupted in angry voices. President Foster held up. President Helen Foster stood before the recording equipment in the White House communications room. Behind her, technicians made final adjustments to the broadcast system. This message would be transmitted on every known galactic frequency, sent through relay stations across thousands of light years. Every species with the technology to receive it would hear what she had to say. "We're ready, ma'am," the chief technician said. Helen took a breath and nodded. The red light came on. Across the galaxy, receivers began picking up the signal. "My name is Helen Foster, and I speak for the people of Earth," she began. Her voice was steady and clear. "3 months ago, we sent Ambassador Daniel Hayes to meet the Galactic Council. We came in peace, hoping to find our place among the stars. Daniel was a good man, a man who believed that dialogue was stronger than weapons, that understanding could bridge any divide." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Daniel Hayes was murdered, poisoned by members of the Galactic Council, because he dared to suggest ending the war between the Council and the Sovereignty. He saw what many of you already know, that this conflict has consumed your civilizations for so long that you've forgotten what peace looks like. The technicians began broadcasting the evidence. The recordings played, Zixthar's voice discussing Daniel's elimination. The conspiracy was laid bare for the entire galaxy to see. Names were named. Species were identified. The corruption was undeniable. These individuals killed our ambassador not because he threatened their lives, but because he threatened their profits. Helen continued. They make fortunes from weapons sales, from controlling trade routes that only exist because of the war. They have convinced trillions of beings that eternal conflict is normal, that peace is impossible. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. They were wrong to kill Daniel Hayes. Not just morally wrong, though that's obvious enough. They were wrong strategically. They thought murdering a peacemaker would end the discussion of peace. Instead, they've made that discussion unavoidable. Helen's expression softened slightly. Before he died, Daniel recorded his final thoughts. He outlined a framework for peace talks, a way forward that addresses the legitimate grievances on both sides. He did this knowing he might not live to see it implemented. "I'm going to share those thoughts now, not as the president of Earth, but as someone honoring the final wishes of a remarkable man." The broadcast shifted to Daniel's recorded messages. His face appeared on screens across the galaxy, human but somehow universal in his earnestness. He spoke about demilitarized zones, prisoner exchanges, and neutral mediation. He identified the core issues: territorial disputes over resource-rich systems, war crimes that demanded acknowledgement, and the desperate need for someone to break the cycle of revenge. "The war continues not because peace is impossible," Daniel's recorded voice said, "but because no one has been neutral enough to be trusted by both sides. Earth can be that neutral party. We have no history with either side. We gain nothing from your conflict continuing. We have everything to gain from peace." When the recording ended, Helen spoke again. Daniel Hayes believed that even a million-year war could end if one side had the courage to stop fighting first. He believed that peace was always possible, no matter how deep the wounds. Earth still believes that. "We're willing to mediate talks between the Council and the Sovereignty. We're willing to put ourselves at risk to help you find a path forward." She stood straighter, her voice growing harder. "But make no mistake, we will not be victims. We will not be silenced. If anyone attempts to harm another human diplomat, you will discover that while we prefer peace, we are fully capable of defending ourselves. Earth's defense fleet is mobilized and ready. We hope we never have to use it." Helen ended the broadcast with Daniel's own words. "We reach across the stars not to conquer, but to understand. Not to dominate, but to unite. The greatest victory is not won in battle, but in the courage to imagine peace when all seems lost." The transmission ended. Now came the waiting. The response was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in millennia. On Council worlds, anti-war protests erupted. Young members of various species took to the streets demanding answers from their leaders. How could the Council murder a diplomat seeking peace? How long would the war continue? The Lumini homeworld saw demonstrations that lasted for weeks, their crystalline bodies forming massive light displays spelling out demands for change. The Vrex population was particularly shaken. Many had trusted Zixthar, believing him to be a wise leader. Now they learned he was a murderer who profited from war. Calls for his removal grew louder each day. The Vrex Council chamber became a battleground of angry debates. In sovereignty space, the reaction was more cautious but no less significant. Warlord Krivas, the supreme military commander of the sovereignty forces, watched the human broadcast 3 times. He was a massive being from a species that resembled armored reptiles, with scales that could deflect most small arms fire and strength that could bend steel. He had fought the Council for his entire life, as had his ancestors for countless generations. But the human's message stirred something in him. Not weakness exactly, more like exhaustion. He was tired. His people were tired. The war had cost them so much, and for what? Territory they couldn't settle because of ongoing fighting? Resources they couldn't use because supply lines were constantly under attack? Pride Krivas called a meeting of his top commanders. They gathered in his flagship, a massive vessel that had seen 1,000 battles. "The humans have made an interesting offer," he said, his voice a deep rumble. "It's a trick," one commander insisted. "The Council is using the humans to make us lower our guard." "Did you not watch the broadcast?" Another commander asked. "The Council killed the human. They're not working together." The debate raged for hours. Eventually, Krivas made his decision. "We will send a representative to preliminary talks, not to surrender but to listen. If the humans are sincere, we have much to gain. If it's a trap, we'll lose one ship. We've lost far more to this war already." On the Council station, chaos reigned. Zixthar and the other conspirators found themselves under investigation. Their assets were frozen, their communications monitored. Several species demanded their immediate arrest and trial. The Council's structure, so carefully maintained for millions of years, was cracking under the weight of revealed corruption. A Luminite diplomat named Velmora emerged as a voice of reason. She had long opposed the war but lacked the political power to change anything. Now, with the conspiracy exposed, she found support from reformers across multiple species. She called for the conspirators' removal and proposed accepting the human offer of mediation. "We have fought for so long that we've forgotten why we started," Velmora said in a speech before the Council Assembly. "The humans are right. We need someone neutral, someone with no stake in continuing the conflict. If we reject this opportunity because of pride, we deserve the endless suffering we've created." Earth appointed a new ambassador. Lisa Bennett had served with Daniel Hayes years ago, when both were young diplomats assigned to the Mars colonies. She had left diplomatic service to join the military, rising to the rank of commander before returning to civilian life. She was tough, practical, and had no illusions about how difficult the task ahead would be. "I'm not Daniel," Lisa told President Foster during her briefing. "I don't have his gift for words or his ability to make people believe in miracles." "Good," Helen replied. "Daniel believed in the impossible and it got him killed. You believe in the difficult but achievable. That's what we need now." Lisa assembled her team. Dr. Nathan Price was a political scientist who specialized in conflict resolution. He had studied every major war in human history and several alien conflicts that Earth had learned about through Council databases. Captain Greg Mason would handle security, and he took his job seriously. He reviewed every possible threat scenario, planned escape routes, and made sure the diplomatic team could defend themselves if necessary. Dr. Claire Davis joined as cultural attaché. She had spent years studying the limited information Earth had about alien psychology and sociology. Her job would be to help Lisa navigate the complex cultural expectations of dozens of different species. The meeting location was chosen carefully. Neither council nor sovereignty territory would work. A neutral location was essential. They settled on an abandoned space station in the Vale Nebula, far from any contested systems. The station had once been a trading post but had been empty for centuries after a local star went nova and disrupted trade routes. Human engineers arrived first, repairing basic life support and communication systems. They installed surveillance equipment and established secure channels back to Earth. Then they waited. The sovereignty arrived first, which surprised everyone. Warlord Krivas himself came, along with a small delegation and a single warship for protection. He toured the station, examining the human repairs with what might have been approval. "Functional," he said to Lisa when they met. "Not elegant, but functional. Very human." "We do our best," Lisa replied, not sure if she'd been complimented or insulted. The council delegation arrived 3 days later. Velmora led them, having... The first human peacekeepers arrived in the Arcturus sector 6 months after the initial agreements were signed. They wore distinctive blue uniforms, a color chosen specifically because it had no military significance to either the Council or the sovereignty. The blue represented Earth's oceans, the cradle of human life, and humanity hoped it would come to represent peace across the galaxy. Captain Greg Mason led the peacekeeping force despite his injuries from the assassination attempt. His shoulders still ached in cold environments, but he refused to stay behind. The doctors had cleared him for duty, and Greg felt responsible for seeing this through. He had nearly died protecting Lisa Bennett. Now he would help protect the fragile peace she had negotiated. The Arcturus sector contained 3 star systems that had been contested for over 50,000 years. Cities lay in ruins, planets bore scars from orbital bombardments. The populations, a mix of council and sovereignty species who had somehow survived the fighting, were exhausted and desperate. They didn't trust the peacekeepers at first. They had seen too many promises broken, too many ceasefires violated. Greg's strategy was simple: show, don't tell. Instead of making grand speeches, the human peacekeepers got to work. They repaired infrastructure, established secure supply lines, and most importantly, treated everyone fairly. It didn't matter if someone was from a council species or a sovereignty species. Human peacekeepers enforced the same rules for everyone. Dr. Claire Davis worked alongside the peacekeepers, establishing cultural exchange programs. She brought together children from different species, creating schools where former enemies learned together. It was awkward at first. Young Vrex and Krell, who had been taught to hate each other, found themselves sitting in the same classroom. But children are more adaptable than adults. Within months, Greg was seeing kids from opposing species playing together, sharing food, helping each other with homework. Back on the Vale Nebula Station, Lisa Bennett was deep in the most difficult part of the peace process. Phase 3 of Daniel Hayes' plan called for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Both sides would acknowledge war crimes and victims would have a voice. It was inspired by similar commissions Earth had established after its own devastating conflicts. The proposal was met with resistance from both the Council and the Sovereignty. Admitting to war crimes meant accepting blame. It meant confronting atrocities that had been justified as military necessity. Neither side wanted to open those wounds. "This is unnecessary," one Council diplomat argued. "We should focus on the future, not dwell on the past." Lisa understood the reluctance, but she also knew that without acknowledging the past, the future would just repeat the same patterns. "Healing requires truth," she said. "You can't build lasting peace on a foundation of lies and buried pain." Dr. Nathan Price had spent months researching the war's history, documenting atrocities committed by both sides. The evidence was overwhelming and horrific. Entire planets had been sterilized. Prisoners had been tortured. Civilians had been deliberately targeted. Both the Council and the Sovereignty had committed acts that violated every conceivable standard of morality. Nathan compiled the evidence into a report that was distributed to both delegations. The document was thousands of pages long, filled with testimony from survivors, military records, and forensic analysis. Reading it was like staring into an abyss. The sheer scale of suffering was incomprehensible. Bellamora read the entire report. It took her 3 days, and by the end, her crystalline body had dimmed significantly. A sign of deep distress in Lumine, she called for an emergency council session and spoke with unusual passion. "We have done terrible things," she said. "We have justified them as necessary for victory, as revenge for wrongs done to us. But this report shows us what we truly are, a civilization that has lost its way. We have become monsters in the name of defeating monsters." Her words sparked heated debate. Some council members argued that their actions had been defensive, that the Sovereignty had committed worse crimes. Others insisted that war made different moral rules necessary. But slowly, gradually, voices began agreeing with Velmora. The younger generation of council representatives especially supported the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In Sovereignty territory, Warlord Krivas faced similar struggles. His military commanders resisted the idea of admitting to anything that might be seen as weakness. In their culture, strength and honor were paramount. Acknowledging crimes felt like surrender. But Krivas had been thinking about his own experiences. He had ordered attacks that killed civilians. He had authorized interrogation techniques that crossed into torture. At the time, he had believed these actions were necessary. Now, reading Nathan's report, he wasn't so sure. The war had transformed everyone involved into something less than they could have been. He called his commanders together and spoke plainly. "We have fought for generations. Our ancestors fought. Their ancestors fought. We tell ourselves this is about honor, about justice, about protecting our people. But look at what we have become. Look at what we have done. He gestured to the report. The humans have documented our actions. Both sides. They are not taking sides or assigning blame to one faction over another. They are simply showing us the truth. Can we be brave enough to face it? One commander, a grizzled veteran named Rektar, spoke up. What would you have us do? Apologize to the council? Beg forgiveness? No, Krevis said. I would have us tell the truth. Acknowledge what we have done, good and bad. Give our victims a voice. And challenge the council to do the same. Real strength is not in pretending we are perfect. It is in facing our failures and choosing to be better. The debate continued for weeks, but eventually, both the council and the sovereignty agreed to establish the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The commission would be co-chaired by human mediators, with representatives from both sides. Victims would be allowed to testify. Those who had committed crimes could confess and seek reconciliation rather than punishment. The first hearings were held in a specially constructed facility on a neutral moon. Lisa Bennett attended, sitting in the audience as the proceedings began. The room was filled with beings from dozens of species, victims and perpetrators sitting in the same space for the first time. The first testimony came from a Krell civilian named Peltha. She had been a teacher on a council world when sovereignty forces invaded. She described watching her students die in an orbital strike that targeted schools and hospitals. Her voice was steady but filled with pain that had festered for decades. I do not want revenge, Peltha said. I want acknowledgement. I want those who gave the orders to look me in the eye and admit what they did. I want to know that my students' deaths meant something, that their story will prevent future deaths. A sovereignty commander named Varkos came forward. He had ordered the orbital strike Peltha described. His scales were dull with age, his posture bent. I gave the order, he said. I was told the facilities were being used as military staging areas. I did not verify. I should have verified, he turned to Peltha. I cannot undo what I did. I cannot bring back those you lost, but I acknowledge my failure. I acknowledge that I made a choice that killed innocents. And I am sorry. The room was silent. Peltha looked at Varkos for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. It was acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was the first step toward healing. The hearings continued for months. Story after story emerged. Each one a small piece of the war's massive tragedy. Some testimonies were angry, filled with rage that might never fully dissipate. Others were quiet, almost gentle, as if the speakers were too tired for anger. But all of them were heard. All of them were recorded. All of them mattered. Lisa found the process emotionally exhausting. She had studied war, but experiencing these testimonies was different from reading about conflict in a textbook. Every evening, she would return to her quarters and record her observations, trying to process what she had heard. Greg Mason visited her one evening, finding her staring out at the stars. How do you do it? He asked. How do you listen to all that pain and not break? I think about Daniel, Lisa said. He believed this was possible. He died believing it. Every time I want to give up, I remember that he thought humanity could help end this war. I can't let him down. Meanwhile, the practical work of peace continued. The 3 systems under human stewardship were showing remarkable progress. Infrastructure was being rebuilt. Trade was resuming. Most importantly, populations were mixing. Council and sovereignty citizens were learning to live as neighbors rather than enemies. Dr. Claire Davis helped establish joint governance councils in each system. The councils included equal representation from both sides, with humans serving as tiebreakers when necessary. The first few meetings were tense, but gradually the representatives began working together. They discovered common interests: clean water, functioning power grids, schools for their children, medical care. Politics became less about ancient grudges and more about practical governance. But there were still problems. Extremists on both sides opposed the peace process. They staged attacks, trying to sabotage the reconciliation efforts. In the Arcturus sector, a bomb exploded at a mixed species. 5 years had passed since Daniel Hayes died in a guest room on the council station. 5 years since humanity discovered that the galaxy was locked in an ancient war. 5 years since a murder became the catalyst for peace. The changes in those 5 years were so profound that younger generations could barely remember what life had been like before. On Earth, a memorial stood in Geneva, where the old United Nations building once housed global governance. The structure was simple but elegant, made of materials sourced from all the systems now at peace. At its center was a statue of Daniel Hayes captured in a moment of quiet contemplation. The artist had chosen not to show him giving a speech or shaking hands with alien dignitaries. Instead, Daniel was shown looking at the stars, his expression hopeful and determined. Carved into the memorial's base were his final words, translated into 40 languages, including several alien tongues. Students visited on field trips, learning about the man who had changed galactic history. Diplomats came before their first assignments, touching the statue's base for luck. Parents brought their children, telling them stories about how one person's courage could change everything. Helen Foster, no longer president but still influential, visited the memorial on the anniversary of Daniel's death. She was older now, her hair completely gray, but her eyes still held the fierce determination that had guided humanity through its most challenging years. She stood before the statue, remembering the day she had learned of Daniel's murder and the decision she had made to turn tragedy into triumph. A young woman approached her. She wore the blue uniform of the diplomatic corps, the same blue that peacekeepers wore across the galaxy. "Madam President," the woman said, then corrected herself. "Sorry, Madam Foster. I wanted to thank you. I'm heading to my first assignment tomorrow. The Outer Rim, helping mediate a dispute between two council species over mining rights." Helen smiled. "What's your name?" "Officer Kelly Wright. I studied Ambassador Hayes in school. He's the reason I joined the diplomatic service. I want to help maintain what he started." "Then you're already honoring his memory," Helen said. "Remember that diplomacy isn't about grand gestures. It's about the daily work of building trust one conversation at a time." Kelly nodded, thanked her, and left. Helen watched her go, thinking about how much had changed. When Daniel died, Earth had just 7 ships capable of interstellar travel. Now they had hundreds, spread across multiple sectors, all working to maintain peace. Humanity had become the galaxy's primary mediator, not through military might, but through moral authority, earned by doing the hard work others had given up on. In the Arcturus sector, Greg Mason walked through a rebuilt city. The buildings were a mix of architectural styles, reflecting the different species that now lived here. Vrex hexagonal structures stood next to Krell water gardens and Lumini crystal towers. Children of different species played in the streets, their games a mixture of various cultural traditions. Greg's shoulder still bothered him sometimes, especially when the weather changed. The scar from the energy blast would never fully fade, but he wore it with pride. He had earned it protecting peace, and that meant something. He stopped at a school, one of the mixed species institutions that Claire Davis had helped establish. Through the windows, he could see a Vrex teacher instructing a classroom of students from 4 different species. The young beings sat together, learning mathematics that worked across different number systems. They would grow up seeing diversity as normal, cooperation as natural. They would be the generation that truly lived the peace rather than just remembering the war. Claire herself had moved on to new challenges. She was now coordinating cultural exchanges across dozens of systems, bringing artists, scientists, and educators together from species that had been enemies. The programs were wildly successful. A sovereignty composer had just won a major council art prize. A council scientist was collaborating with sovereignty engineers on a new propulsion system. These small connections were weaving a fabric of cooperation that would be hard to tear apart. Greg continued his patrol, greeting residents by name. Some remembered when he first arrived, when the peacekeepers were viewed with suspicion. Now the blue uniforms were welcomed. When disputes arose, people called for peacekeepers because they knew humans would be fair. Greg had trained local security forces, teaching them the principles that guided Earth's peacekeeping: equality under law, proportional response, and respect for all species. On the council station, now renamed Unity Station to reflect its new purpose, Villamora served as Eternal Chancellor. The title was traditional, but everything else about her leadership was revolutionary. She had reformed the council's structure, implementing transparency measures that prevented the kind of corruption that had led to Daniel's murder. Every decision was recorded and made public. Citizens could petition for hearings. Power was distributed more evenly among member species. The conspirators who had ordered Daniel's death were imprisoned on a remote world. Zixthar and his co-conspirators lived under comfortable conditions, but they would never leave. Their trial had been public, their crimes documented. Some had asked for forgiveness during the Truth and Reconciliation hearings. Others remained defiant, insisting they had been right to protect council interests. But they were relics now, remnants of a way of thinking that the galaxy was leaving behind. Velmora often thought about the irony. She had opposed the war for decades but lacked the power to change anything. Then humans arrived and one of them died, and suddenly change became possible. Sometimes the universe worked in strange ways. She had learned to accept that the path to peace had been paved with tragedy, and to honor that tragedy by making sure it led somewhere worthwhile. In sovereignty space, Warlord Krivas had transformed from military commander to peace advocate. He traveled extensively, speaking to veteran groups and military academies. His message was always the same. True strength lies not in endless fighting but in knowing when to stop. Many sovereignty citizens struggled with the transition to peace. Their entire culture had been built around martial prowess and honor in battle. What did honor mean when there were no battles to fight? Krivas worked to redefine it. Honor, he taught, came from keeping promises, from protecting the weak, from building rather than destroying. He had personally donated a significant portion of his wealth to establish the Daniel Hayes Foundation. The foundation provided education to war orphans from all species. Thousands of young beings who had lost parents to the conflict were given opportunities to learn, to grow, to become something other than the next generation of soldiers. One of those students, a young Krell named Pelkas, had graduated at the top of his class and was now studying engineering at a prestigious council university. He had been orphaned when he was 5, his parents killed in a raid. The old Krivas, the warlord who lived only for war, might have recruited that orphan as a soldier seeking revenge. The new Krivas had given him a scholarship and a future. The joint military force that Krivas had proposed during the peace negotiations was now operational. The Unity Defense Force combined soldiers from both former sides, training them to work together. The force handled peacekeeping operations, disaster relief, and protection of trade routes from pirates. It was small but growing, and it worked. Soldiers who trained together, who saved each other's lives in emergency situations, couldn't easily see each other as enemies. Commander Ryan Mitchell was one of the human advisors to the Unity Defense Force. He was young, only 26, but he had proven himself capable. He worked with sovereignty and council officers daily, helping them navigate the cultural differences that could cause misunderstandings. Sometimes his job was as simple as explaining why one species' gesture of respect looked like an insult to another species. Ryan had met Lisa Bennett once at a diplomatic reception. She had given him advice that he carried with him. Remember Daniel Hayes, remember why we do this work. One person can change everything. Lisa herself was now Ambassador General, a title created specifically for her. She traveled the galaxy on the refurbished Horizon's Edge, the same ship that had brought Daniel to his fatal meeting with the Council. The ship had been upgraded with better engines, improved defensive systems, and more comfortable quarters. But Lisa had insisted on keeping Daniel's old cabin exactly as it was. Sometimes, when facing a particularly difficult negotiation, she would sit in that cabin and imagine what Daniel would have done. Her missions took her to emerging conflicts, disputes that could escalate if not handled carefully. Last month, she had mediated a territorial disagreement between 2 minor council species. The month before that, she had helped resolve a trade dispute that was threatening to restart hostilities in a border region. The work was endless, but it was necessary. Peace wasn't something you achieved once and then forgot about. It required constant maintenance, constant attention, constant choice. Dr. Nathan Price traveled with her, along with a rotating team of specialists. Nathan had become one of the galaxy's leading experts on conflict resolution. He had written several books about the peace process, analyzing what had worked and what hadn't. His texts were required reading in diplomatic academies across dozens of species.